Welcome back, everybody, to my object-oriented programming course using Java. This is a continuation of the exception handling basics that I had video that I put up part 1, so this is going to be part 2. Today I want to talk about the keyword throw, and then next video I'll talk about what throw versus throws means in terms of exception handling. So let's take a look. So if we take a look at some code here, we are going to use the scanner class. Okay, we're going to instantiate an object. We're going to ask for the number of male dancers, number of female dancers. And then what's going to happen is I could easily write a error message here that says, lesson is canceled, no students, and so on, right? But because I want to make use of the exception handling, we're going to convert that or not use system.out.println, but we're going to use the throw statement. So throw is something you use within a method. So always remember that. So there are times where you're going to want to throw exceptions in a method, and the throw keyword would be the one to do that with. You should never ever do this in real life in terms of creating an application where you're doing an if statement and then you throw an exception instead of just doing a system.out.println. That is not what this is for. What I'm trying to show you is just the sequence of what happens when you throw an exception. All right. Okay. So I just want to get that out of the way. So you should never, if you interview for a job and you get the job and then they fire you because you were doing things like this, please do not blame me because I'm giving you a warning not to do this. All right. Okay. Now that we got that out of the way, this is a simple program. We're just asking for the number of male dancers, number of female dancers, and then based on that, I'm just using an if condition. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw an exception in here in the main method. And I'm going to give you the order of how everything executes, okay? So when you throw an exception, you're going to always do a throw keyword, obviously. And then after that, you're going to do a new because you want to instantiate an exception object. Now, where I'm going with this is that right now we're using the generic exception class. You don't have to use a generic exception class. You can use a more detailed class because I'm going to show you in a minute where all the what kind of exceptions you can catch. Okay? In this case, we're just throwing a new generic exception. Okay, so if we come in here and we go inside the try block, okay, initially when we were doing our simple examples, we didn't have throw. So what would happen is when we did a try catch block, an exception would happen on a specific line, and then that exception then got caught in our catch block. It's going to be the same concept, except now instead of letting the compiler go through the motions, you're actually manually throwing the exception because it's something that you need to let the compiler know not to continue inside your try block. So one of the strategies that you can use when you're doing some type of exception handling is if you know that you cannot continue with the rest of the lines of the code in your method, then you may want to throw an exception, such as any type of calculation. If they're giving you invalid input, then you can throw an exception and then let the catch block handle that. So in this case, I do not want to proceed any further in this if statement if men is 0 and women are 0. If that's the case, then if I had more lines of code here, I don't want to continue. I'm going to throw an exception. So what exactly happens is if men is 0 and women are 0, we're going to throw an exception. So what this means is that a new exception object will be created at the heap memory, right? So this exception object will be created because of this new keyword. And then we're going to pass in a parameter. In this case, in the generic exception, the parameter is going to be a string. What this represents is the actual message that you're going to be writing out. Okay, if you don't pass a parameter in, you may get a default message, which is something that you do not want. Okay, sometimes you may just want a Java to handle the message for you. So you have control as to what you're going to print out to the user. So when we get to this line here, because if this is true, right, and I'm going to make it so that it throws this. We're going to throw a new exception. That's going to create a new object in memory for the exception. Okay, execution is going to halt at line 12. And then what happens is when an exception is thrown, which you are doing here, then now the control goes back to the catch block, right? So exception E now becomes, it's going to point to that exception object that you created on line 12. And then once you have that reference on E, then I can get the message that was passed in. So e.getMessage is actually saying, get me the message, which getMessage is a method. It's a public method. And that gives you what is inside here. Okay, I'm assigning that to a string variable called message. And then I'm going to print it out to a new line, and I'm just going to exit the program. Okay, so let's run this real quick. So if I enter 0, then I enter 0. So you see that lesson is canceled and I have no student. So again, order of execution, it came in here, we threw a new exception that creates an object in the heap memory. The catch block now gets activated. This E is now pointing to this new exception that just got created, which means that I can call the getMessage method, which is going to get me what's passed inside here. I'll save that, and then now I can just print out that message, which is lesson is canceled, no students, and then I can exit. I didn't have to exit. I can let the program continue, but in this case, I just wanted to not continue here. Okay. Now let's look at a visual. Okay, I'm going to show you a visual. All right, so here's the code. I'm going to break it down here, okay? So when men and women are 0, all right, we are over here, right? So what is this step going to do? This step is going to create in heap memory, okay, it's going to create an exception object. Okay, so we'll have a little box here. This exception object. And along with that new, we're using the new because we're using a constructor, right? So when you have the exception class, one of the constructors allows for a parameter, right? So this really is, it is a constructor, right? New, exception, and then the constructor. I'm not sure how many constructors the exception object exactly has, the class, but I know that this is the simplest one. You can probably do a little more research as to if there's other constructors that you can use with exception, right? So this exception has, the exception class has this constructor where you pass in a string, okay? And then in the exception object that gets created in the heap, you have a method called getMessage, right? Which is what you see down here, right? But we're not there yet. Okay, so by me saying throw new, I'm creating a new object in the heap. Okay, and now execution halts, right? So to this point, we stop, right? Nothing else is going to execute because this is signaling to the compiler that an exception has happened, an exception has been thrown. Okay, and in this case, you threw the exception, right? You threw the exception. So when either when the application itself throws an unknown exception or a known exception that you're throwing manual, execution will be now go to the catch statement. Okay, so the catch statement now is taking control, right? So anything after the throws, forget about that already. Okay, so now we have E, okay, which is a reference type of exception, and that's going to point to the object that we just created, right? And remember that now E, because it's now in heap memory, we have the get message, right? And that's already been populated with the constructor, right? We populated this here, okay? And now E inside, okay, I'm able to get the message, which is this, right? And then now I'm creating in the catch block, I'm creating a variable called message. Okay, and then when I do the system.out.println, oops, sorry. When I do this line here, okay, that is what's showing on the console. So let me show you real quick. It's this thing here, right? That's what we were printing out, right? So this is not printing anything, okay? So I want you to understand that this is not printing anything. What's printing the message is this statement here, okay? And then once we print it out, right? So output. Once we print it out, lesson is canceled, blah blah blah. Then I exit the program, right? So this is, we stop the program, basically, right? Same situation would arise if min was equal to 0. You're still creating a new exception in heap, right? But then the message that you're passing into the constructor is this, right? And then again, you use the get message over here, and it's just gonna get that, okay? And that's basically it in terms of throwing exceptions. So you would throw an exception inside a method anytime that you want to halt the program and then have the catch block execute the code that you want to do, right? And you don't necessarily have to exit the program. You can handle your exception and then do something else. Now, here's another caveat that you should watch out for when you're creating a catch block. Anything that you declare in the catch block is not accessible outside, meaning that this message variable here, I cannot access it anywhere outside here. So that's not allowed. Okay, because this is a compound statement, right? Anything within a compound statement, you declare anything in a compound statement, it's not going to be accessible outside that compound statement. Same thing goes for the try block. Anything you declare inside a try block, it's not going to be accessible outside of that try block. So when you're creating a method and you're going to do some try catch type of logic, make sure that you declare any variables outside the try block before the try, right? That's good practice. Now sometimes it's inevitable where you're going to have to declare variables in the try block, and that's perfectly fine, but don't make it a habit. Don't make it a habit. Okay? Okay, cool. So I hope that you learned a little bit more about exception handling with the throw keyword. And then next video, I'm going to talk about throws. Oh, did I forget? Oh yeah, I forgot to show you. Let me show you the page of the exceptions before I stop this. So if you go on this Oracle site over here, I can probably put it on the YouTube thing. You go on the Oracle site, you have the exception class, right? It inherits from throwable, inherits from object. And then from the exception class, you have all these exception classes that inherit from exception. So activation, all these exceptions that you can throw. So you can throw these exceptions yourself. Okay? And then what makes it really, really robust is that, so if you go back one level, right? So we're at the exception level. These are the subclasses, right? So if I want to throw a runtime exception, so let's look at this one here, right? If I throw a runtime exception, I can even go even deeper and pick in any subclass of the runtime exception. Okay, so again, you can get really detailed. So arithmetic exception, buffer overflow exception, and these are things that you can throw. You can throw and handle in your code. The one other thing I wanted to show you was hopefully the list. Right, so here are the constructors, right? So in our case, we're using this constructor, right? So constructs a new exception with a specified detailed message. And then you have other constructors that you can use with different parameters, right? And then when we get to the future, like part 3 of this video, we can create our own detailed exceptions, ones that are custom to us. And that you can do that as well. Okay? Okay, so that's the one last thing I want to show you. Hopefully you learned a little bit more about exceptions and how it works in the flow. Hit me up, hit the subscribe button quickly. I want to get to about 10,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you like this video, please subscribe. This way I keep the channel going, and it gives me more motivation to post more free stuff, free content. Have a good day.